I'm Natalie Brooks. I'm 34, founder of Blue Nova Digital, now valued at $8 million. I built this company from a folding chair and a second-hand desk, working 18-hour days, not for glory, but to lift my family out of struggle. Last Sunday over dinner in the house, I paid for my father looked me in the eye and said, "We've decided to give your company shares to your sister. She needs them more than you do." My mother nodded, my sister smiled, and my father added, "You can always make more money." She can't. I didn't argue. I simply said, "I see." Then I walked out. That night, I froze the mortgage, canceled the tuition, and called my lawyer. That was just the beginning. Before I tell you the rest, drop a comment, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you believe standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you free. Growing up in Haverhill, Pennsylvania, our house always smelled faintly of rust and old pine leftovers from a home that hadn't been updated since 1973. My father, Robert Brooks, worked night shifts at a local auto parts factory. My mother, Diane, patched together a schedule of part-time cleaning gigs and seasonal cashier work to make ends meet. The word vacation had no place in our vocabulary. Money wasn't tight, it was practically absent. We lived in a cramped two-bedroom home with a leaking roof, chipped linoleum floors, and a water heater that had a mind of its own. The kind of place where windows whined when the wind blew and every ceiling stain told a story. But it was ours. Then there was Samantha Sam, my younger sister by 3 years. Diagnosed with asthma before she turned 5, she quickly became the center of everything. Her condition was manageable with medication, but the narrative that took root was that Sam was fragile, special, delicate. And well, I was not. By the time I was 10, I understood my place in our family ecosystem. Sam needed attention. I needed to stay out of the way. When she had doctor's appointments, no one asked if I needed a ride to my school recital. If there was only one winter coat in the budget, it went to her because Natalie still got last year's, and it's not too small yet. Birthday parties. Sam got balloons and a new dress. I got a polite dinner at home, and maybe a card if Mom remembered. No one ever said it out loud, but the rules were clear. Sam needed support. I needed to be strong. My job was to cause no trouble, fix what I could, and accept what was left. And I did. Quietly. Because even as a child, I knew that complaining wouldn't make the money appear or the attention shift. But I had something no one in my family saw coming: drive. At 11, I ran the most profitable lemonade stand in our neighborhood, organized, marketed, and logged like a Fortune 500. At 14, I started repairing neighbors' old desktops and laptops for $15 a pop, charging a quarter of what the local tech shop demanded. Mr. Callahan, a retired engineer next door, showed me how to disassemble a CPU one Saturday morning. After that, I never stopped learning. When other kids were spending allowance on movie tickets, I was stockpiling cash in a worn, spiral notebook tucked behind a shoebox in my closet labeled "Someday." But no matter what I earned, it rarely stayed mine. Dad's pickup needed brake work, I pitched in. Sam needed a hypoallergenic jacket for winter. I handed over half my tutoring money. No one asked. But the air in that house, thick with pressure and pride, told me what was expected. And so I became what they needed: invisible, dependable, and never too loud. Looking back, I realize I was being parented into being a parent. But at the time, I thought I was just being good. I didn't know then that this quiet role, the fixer, the giver, the one who never says no, would become a chain I'd carry well into adulthood. Or that one day I'd have to choose between breaking that chain or letting it break me. I didn't choose State College because it was my dream school. I chose it because it was close. Close enough to Haverhill to come home on weekends, to send money when needed, to keep being the dependable daughter even while living in a dorm. I had gotten into Cornell with a partial scholarship, a business school that sent kids to Wall Street and Silicon Valley. But when I told my parents about the acceptance, my mother didn't even look up from the sink. "That sounds expensive," she said. Besides, Samantha's not doing well with the pollen this year. You being nearby would help. I nodded like I always did, like someone who knew her role. So I went to state, studied business administration, and worked 3 jobs to cover what my grants and loans didn't. Mornings at the campus library, afternoons tutoring high school students in algebra, and weekend shifts ringing up groceries 2 towns over. I kept the shoebox in my dorm closet this time. Labeled it next. I still sent money home. Not because they asked, though sometimes they did, but because I couldn't stop myself. That unspoken script from childhood still played in the back of my mind. Don't let the family fall apart. It's your job to hold it together. It was in my sophomore year that I met Ethan Moore. He was late to our first class in Introduction to Entrepreneurship, stumbling in with his laptop under one arm and a half-eaten granola bar in the other. His hair was a mess, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. But when he talked about algorithms, market inefficiencies, how code could solve problems, most people didn't even realize they had his eyes lit up like matches in the dark. We were assigned as partners on a semester-long project to create a mock business plan. He confessed early on, "I can code like hell, but I have zero business instincts." I thought ROI was a video game. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because for the first time in years, I felt like I had something no one else in the room did. I knew how to run things, not just on paper, in life. I'd been managing crises and balancing invisible budgets since I was 10. Together, we built a pitch for a digital marketing platform, something lean, accessible, and intuitive. I handled market research, competitive analysis, and investor pitch slides. Ethan wrote the prototype code and sketched out the user interface. We aced the class, highest score in the department. Our professor pulled us aside and said, "You could actually build this." That night, over cheap coffee in the student union, Ethan said it out loud. "We should try, like, really try. This doesn't have to be pretend." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to throw all the invisible expectations out the window and run with an idea that was mine. But home was always in my ear. My father called the next day. "You hear back from that marketing firm yet? You need a stable job, Natalie, with benefits, no funny business." My mother added, "Startups are for people who can afford to fail. That's not us, sweetheart." Meanwhile, Samantha had dropped out of community college. Again. She was working part-time at a vintage thrift store and texting me almost daily with money requests for everything from rent to new inhalers. Every call home was the same. "Sam can't catch a break." "Tyler, her boyfriend, might lose his gig. Can you help?" I felt split down the middle. One path was lit with certainty, a solid salary, a desk job, no questions asked. The other was risk, caffeine code, and a dream built from nothing. One path kept me reliable. The other let me breathe. Then one night, as I was ironing my blouse for an interview with the Chicago firm Ethan called, "I quit my job," he said. "No preamble, just a cliff. I'm doing this full time. I believe in it. I believe in us. Are you in or out?" My hands trembled on the phone, because I knew what I was about to say would change everything. For once, I paused, not to ask for permission, not to make sure someone else was okay with it. I just asked myself, "What do you want, Natalie?" And for the first time in my life, I listened. The next morning, I declined the marketing job. Then I called Ethan back. "Let's build it." What came next? Hunger, rejection, cold pizza, and unpaid bills. But also fire, the kind that keeps you awake not with fear, but with purpose. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. The day we started the company, it didn't feel like a launch. There were no champagne corks or press releases. Just me, Ethan, a whiteboard from a campus dumpster, and a broken IKEA desk squeezed into my 400-square-foot apartment. We didn't have a name yet, just an idea, a digital platform that small businesses could actually understand and afford. Something smart, simple, scalable. We sketched out wireframes while sitting cross-legged on the floor, laptops overheating on our thighs and our fourth cup of coffee going cold on the windowsill. We ate ramen noodles like it was a food group. Ethan's half of the rent came in the form of extra coding hours and promises, and I bartered tutoring sessions for groceries. We worked 18-hour days because we had to, but also because for the first time I wanted to. This wasn't just a business, it was mine. Still, it didn't take long for reality to tap me on the shoulder. Our first attempt at funding came from a local credit union. We walked in with matching thrift store blazers, pitch deck in hand, and hearts pounding. The loan officer glanced at our documents, then leaned back with a patronizing smile. "You kids don't have assets, or collateral, or a track record," he said, sliding the folder back across the desk without a second look. "Come back when you've been in business 2 years." I nodded politely. Then I stepped outside and broke. On the sidewalk, I collapsed onto a bench and stared at the letter of rejection like it was a verdict. Not just against the business, but against me. The air felt thick, like even the sky was pressing down on my chest. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. "Can you send $300 for Sam's car insurance? She's behind again." Of course. The timing felt cruel. Or maybe just familiar. I'd taken this leap to build something of my own, but my family hadn't noticed. Not really. They still saw me as the steady one, the wallet with a heartbeat. And somehow I still responded like clockwork because I didn't know how not to. Ethan found me on that park bench. He sat beside me in silence for a few minutes, watching the wind rattle the empty coffee cup between our feet. Then finally, "We don't need them." I looked at him, disbelieving. "We need something." "We'll find it," he said, his voice steady. "We'll build it. The same way we're building everything else." And somehow, I believed him. We named the company Blue Nova Digital, a nod to rebirth and explosion, something small turning massive. It felt right. Bold, but quiet. A bit like me. We bought secondhand monitors from a liquidation auction, mounted the whiteboard in the living room with thumbtacks and hope, took turns using the one desk, swapping out every 6 hours, like factory workers on a shift rotation. I cold called small businesses during the day, salons, mechanics, dentists, anyone who might need affordable marketing. I got hung up on, ignored, sometimes mocked. But I kept calling. Each no sharpened our pitch. Each dismissal gave me something to improve. Meanwhile, Ethan pushed updates through the night, polishing the product until it felt real, tangible, like something we could show the world without apologizing. Our first breakthrough came from a man named Timothy Westfield, marketing director at Regional Healthcare Network. I'd followed up 7 times. 7. Emails, voicemails, one handwritten note. When he finally agreed to coffee, I nearly cried. We met at a downtown cafe, the kind with mismatched mugs and too loud jazz. I wore the only blazer I owned and sat with my back straight, every nerve in my body firing. "You're persistent," he said, setting down his cup. "That's why I agreed to meet." We demoed our platform, showed him the dashboards, the analytics, the way we made something powerful feel simple. He asked sharp questions, but I saw it, the flicker in his expression. Interest. Possibility. When he finally leaned back and said, "Let's try a 3-month pilot," I had to grip the table to keep from floating away. That night, Ethan and I splurged on a delivery pizza. Real cheese, no coupons. We sat on the floor like kids and laughed until our stomachs hurt. It wasn't just about landing a client, it was proof. Proof that belief alone wasn't foolish, that when you pair it with effort, resilience, and grit, it becomes something else entirely. Something real. Success at first comes in whispers. For us, it was the hum of a functioning prototype, the ding of an email from a satisfied pilot client, the way our cold calls were now met with interest instead of dismissal. After Timothy's 3-month trial, Blue Nova began to feel less like an experiment and more like a business. And yet the bills grew louder. We needed equipment, software licenses, a real office, not just my one-bedroom apartment doubling as HQ. The little money we had, what hadn't gone to rent or groceries, was already stretched thin. Ethan and I both knew we had to scale. Fast. Before the momentum faded. I remember the night we did the math. We were sitting on my couch, laptops, open spreadsheets glowing in the dark like quiet demands. We needed at least $25,000, just enough to secure a small office space and cover setup costs for our next 3 clients. Anything less would risk everything we'd built. Ethan stared at the screen and then at me. "What about your parents?" he asked gently. "Would they consider investing?" I didn't answer right away. It wasn't that the idea hadn't occurred to me. It had, more than once. But asking my parents, Robert and Diane, to invest felt complicated. They didn't understand startups. They barely understood why I left a guaranteed marketing job to play with websites, as my father once said. But the truth was, they had savings. Modest retirement funds were set aside in an account that they rarely touched. It wasn't much, but it was just enough. "I'll ask," I said finally. A week later, I sat at their kitchen table, the same one where I'd once done my high school math homework, now covered in spreadsheets and printouts. My mother looked confused, my father skeptical. But I pressed on, walking them through the pilot success with Timothy's firm, the client interest we'd generated, and the projected revenue growth if we could scale properly. I wouldn't be asking if I didn't believe in this. I told them, my voice steadier than I felt. "You'd be minority shareholders, 15% combined. Once we turn a profit, you'll get your investment back plus interest." There was a long silence. Finally, my father ran a hand through his thinning hair. "And what if it fails, Natalie?" "What then?" "It won't," I replied. Not because I was sure, but because I needed him to be. A week later, they agreed. We signed the documents with my lawyer, Rachel Adams, who made sure everything was above board. My parents became formal investors, owning 15% of Blue Nova Digital. I gave them printed copies of their shareholder agreement. My mother folded hers neatly and placed it in a drawer next to expired coupons and church bulletins. I didn't know it then, but that decision, so carefully constructed, so legally clean, would become the foundation for the most personal betrayal of my life. But back then, all I felt was gratitude. With their investment, we moved into a small second-floor office above a deli. The walls were yellowed and the carpet smelled faintly of old cheese, but it was ours. Ethan bought us a coffee maker with his own money. I hung up a dry erase calendar and our first client testimonials. For the first time, Blue Nova had a front door with our name on it, a mailbox, a lease. We hired our first employee, Amanda, a recent grad who handled customer onboarding and admin calls. Writing her first paycheck was a surreal experience. Someone else's livelihood now depended on what we were building. I felt pride, but I also felt fear, because now failure wasn't just about me. The next few months blurred. We signed new clients one after another: a local university, a regional bank, a boutique fitness chain. Each success came with new challenges, but we handled them. Ethan optimized the platform. Amanda kept the chaos at bay. I juggled sales, client relations, and operations. Our revenue crossed the $500,000 mark within the year. I took my parents out to dinner to celebrate. The same kitchen table had been replaced by a booth in a mid-range steakhouse. I paid the bill without blinking. My father raised a glass of iced tea and said, "We always believed in you." My mother smiled and added, "You've done so well taking care of the family." Their words were meant as praise, but they landed like weights. Because even in that moment, even in celebration, they didn't see me. Not for the risk I had taken, the vision I had shaped, or the company I had built from nothing. They saw a provider, a financial safety net, a daughter who turned out to be useful. And though I smiled and nodded through the evening, something deep inside me shifted. A quiet, almost imperceptible question formed. Will they ever see me beyond what I can give them? At the time, I didn't have the answer. But I would, sooner than I ever expected. Success has a strange way of shifting people's expectations. The moment Blue Nova crossed 500,000 in annual revenue, it was as if I'd unknowingly checked a box on some invisible form, one that labeled me as not just stable, but endlessly available. Clients saw our growth and assumed we had a full team behind the curtain. We didn't. It was still just me, Ethan, Amanda, and a few contractors we paid by the hour. Friends assumed I had made it. I hadn't. We were breaking even barely. And my family? They assumed I could do more. It started subtly. A casual comment from my mother over lunch. Your sister's been dreaming about her wedding since she was little. It would mean a lot if you could help make it special. At the time, Samantha had just gotten engaged to Tyler Grant, an aspiring musician with a revolving door of part-time jobs and demo tracks. He hadn't held steady employment in years, but to my parents, he was just trying to find his rhythm. Samantha was working part-time at a boutique candle shop, often calling me for money to cover unexpected expenses, which ranged from vet bills to overdue parking tickets. She had long since stopped asking politely. She simply assumed. And now the wedding. I can contribute, I told my mother cautiously. But we're in the middle of onboarding new clients. We need to bring in another developer. Cash flow is tight. Her smile didn't fade. Natalie, she said, you've always been so responsible. Your sister only gets married once. I wanted to say responsibility doesn't mean bottomless. Instead, I said, I'll do what I can. 2 weeks later, I wrote a check for $15,000. It was enough to cover the venue deposit catering for 120 guests, and the band Tyler insisted on booking. Money that should have gone toward growing our dev team. Money Ethan didn't question, though he noticed the strain on our budget. When he asked about the expense, I deflected. Family stuff, I said. I didn't tell him the truth that I was still playing the role I'd never auditioned for, the fixer, the giver, the one who kept things running no matter the cost. The wedding was lovely. Outdoor ceremony, string lights, a rented dance floor under the stars. Samantha wore a dress I'd helped her choose. My name wasn't on the program, but when my mother introduced me to guests, it was always the same. This is Natalie, our successful daughter. She runs her own company. We're so proud of what I provided, not what I created. That night, as I sat at a corner table watching Samantha and Tyler sway through their first dance, my champagne untouched, I felt a quiet ache I couldn't name. I wasn't resentful. Not exactly. I loved my sister. But the math was beginning to add up in a way that scared me. Because every time I said yes to them, I was saying no to something else. To our company's growth. To my own rest. To the part of me that wanted to matter for more than just money. A month later, Blue Nova landed 3 major accounts in a row. We expanded our client services and finally leased a larger office above the deli, doubling our space. Amanda was promoted. We added 2 more employees. Ethan and I stayed up late mapping out a 5-year plan, and I took my parents out to dinner again. A better restaurant this time, cloth napkins and real menus. They ordered confidently, talked at length about Samantha's honeymoon plans, asked when I might help them find a better car now that their old one was acting up. I nodded. I smiled. I paid. They never once asked about Blue Nova. It wasn't malice. It was a kind of blindness one I had trained them into year after year by never drawing a line. That night, as I stood in the parking lot beneath a flickering street lamp, I realized something that hit me harder than any business rejection ever had. In their eyes, my success would always be weighed by how well it served someone else. And the more I gave, the less they saw me at all. Success, I learned, can be both a lifeline and a leash. Blue Nova was thriving on paper. We had tripled our client base in less than a year. Our monthly revenue passed $80,000. We moved into a real office downtown with glass-walled conference rooms, a front desk, and an espresso machine we had no time to use. Our team had grown to 10, each person bright-eyed and full of ideas, and I was unraveling. I'd wake at 4 a.m. in a cold sweat, my heart racing before my eyes even opened. I told myself it was just adrenaline, hustle, the natural toll of leadership. But the truth was quieter, darker. I was living in constant anticipation of the next fire, the next call, the next financial emergency that would land like a rock in my lap and be labeled family. Because while Blue Nova soared, the demands at home didn't slow down, they multiplied. My parents' car finally gave out. I bought them a new one, reliable, modest, safe. They didn't say thank you, not really. Just it was time. Tyler's recording studio had another funding shortfall. I wired $10,000 without blinking. Samantha texted later with a heart emoji, and you're the best, sis. When they needed groceries, I sent gift cards. When they hinted at vacation, I covered hotel points. When the public school near their neighborhood began cutting music programs, I footed the tuition bill for my niece and nephew's private school, $92,000 over 2 years. And when I finally collapsed, it wasn't metaphorical. It was during a client presentation, a major healthcare system we'd been chasing for months. I'd made it to the third slide when my vision blurred. My chest tightened. I don't remember falling, just the sudden coldness of the carpet against my cheek and Amanda's voice calling my name. I woke up in the ER with an IV in my arm and Ethan sitting beside me, his eyes tired and furious. "You're burning out, Natalie," he said. "You can't keep this up." I wanted to protest, but even my breath felt like a lie. He didn't mention my family, but I saw it in his eyes. He'd seen the late-night calls, the sudden check writings, the way I dropped everything when Samantha needed a last-minute doctor's appointment, or my parents' plumbing went out. He knew. Everyone close to me did. And I knew too. I was the CEO of a fast-growing startup, but I had less control over my own life than I ever had before. My body had done what I refused to do. It drew the boundary for me. After I was discharged, I stayed home for a week. It was supposed to be a recovery, but it became a reflection. I finally opened the spreadsheet I'd been avoiding, tracking every dollar I had sent to my family over the past 5 years. The total was staggering, close to $800,000, not including time stress or the countless missed opportunities for rest, growth, or joy. The worst part, I didn't feel proud. I felt erased. That same week, we got an email from Thomas Reed, a venture capitalist from Westridge Partners. He'd seen Ethan present at a regional business conference and wanted to schedule a meeting. His firm was offering Series A funding, real money, real growth. "You're pushing $2 million in valuation," he said during our second call. "Impressive for a team your size. If you're ready, we're ready." The number felt surreal, not just because of what it represented, but because of what it would trigger. Because I already knew what would come next. More expectations, more assumptions, more subtle entitlements masked as family needs. I could already hear it, my parents' quiet suggestion that maybe Samantha and Tyler could use some help buying a house now that the kids were growing. That maybe I could help them plan for retirement since you've got all that investor money now. I hadn't even signed the deal yet, but the price was already being counted. I didn't say anything to Ethan right away. I didn't say anything to my family either. Instead, I sat alone in the new office one night long after everyone else had gone home. The city lights blinked through the windows, soft and silent, while the hum of the server room echoed behind me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel excited about our growth. I felt something else. Fear. Because I realized success without boundaries isn't freedom. It's captivity in a prettier box. And the only way out was learning how to say no. I didn't plan the dinner to be a confrontation. I planned it because we'd reached a milestone. Blue Nova had just signed a major partnership with a West Coast tech firm and secured our first round of venture funding. Valuation nearly $2 million. It should have been a celebration. Instead, it became a reckoning. I hosted it at the home I'd bought for my parents 3 years earlier, a quiet tree-lined suburb an hour from the city. A place they said was too nice at first, then settled into like they'd always belonged. I showed up early with a bottle of champagne from a boutique vineyard, the kind I knew they wouldn't buy themselves. I brought dessert too, a seasonal cheesecake from the bakery near my office. My mother opened the door wearing an apron dusted with flour and that tight smile she saved for special occasions. "Dinner's almost ready," she said. "We made your favorite, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with slivered almonds. The food of childhood, comforting, familiar, and somehow strategic." Samantha and Tyler arrived late as always. Their kids ran straight to the playroom. Tyler gave me a nod like he was walking into a job interview. Samantha wore a loose sweater that barely hid the small swell of her second pregnancy. She said it casually during dinner like it was just another line of small talk. "I quit my job last week," she announced between bites. "The chemicals at the store weren't safe for the baby. And Peter's this close to landing that recording deal, so we're focusing on that." My mother nodded solemnly. "He's got real talent. Just needs the right break." No one asked about the company, about the expansion, about the millions in contracts we were negotiating, or the 80-hour weeks that got us there. They smiled when I poured the champagne. They said congrats when I mentioned the new office space. But the tone was perfunctory, like I was presenting a spreadsheet, not a life's work. Still, I waited until after dessert to bring it up. "I've been thinking about formalizing some things I said," pushing the cheesecake away. "With the company, shares, future planning, trust funds, that sort of thing. Our attorney recommended setting expectations early." My mother looked at my father. A glance. A flicker. Something passed between them. Then he cleared his throat the way he always did before he delivered bad news. "We've actually been meaning to talk to you about that," he said. "About the shares." I nodded, expecting him to reference the 15% they held as early investors. I'd been preparing to propose options, perhaps converting it to passive income or transferring it into a trust. But then he said it. "We've decided to give our shares to Samantha." Silence. I blinked. Thought I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" My voice was quiet. "Even." "The 15%, he repeated. "Our stake in the company. It's going to your sister. She needs the security, Natalie. You understand? She has the children to think about," my mother added, reaching for my hand. "And Peter's still building his career." I looked at Samantha. She wasn't surprised. Her lips were curled into something that looked too close to smug. "This will help with the kids' college," she said sweetly. "You're so good at building wealth. I'm just grateful we're finally part of it." Finally part of it. As if she had done the work. As if her name had been on the loan papers, the late nights, the breakdowns, the near hospitalization. As if I had been holding back something that had always belonged to her. I took a breath. Steady, slow, the kind you take before a storm. "You can't just transfer shares like that," I said, my voice clipped. "There are legal processes, documents, taxes. My lawyer would have to—" "We already spoke to someone," my father interrupted. "Thomas. Or Thompson. Doesn't matter. It's done." Thomas Reed was our venture capitalist. Thompson was no one. A bluff. A lie. Or worse, an attempt to manipulate something they didn't understand. What hit me hardest wasn't the transfer. It was the belief that they could. That what I had built, sacrificed for, bled for, could simply be handed away like an old family heirloom. That their pride in me was only ever a placeholder for possession. That I wasn't a daughter. I was a tool. I stood slowly. Thank you for dinner, I said, retrieving the untouched champagne. I have an early meeting tomorrow. My mother blinked. You haven't had coffee yet. Another time. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the traffic or the lights or the tears until I was sitting in my own driveway, keys still in the ignition, sobbing like a child who'd just realized her parents were never going to see her for who she really was. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. And something inside me, quiet for so long, finally spoke. No more. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was hurt, though I was, but because the ache had finally crystallized into something sharp, something focused. Anger was part of it, but beneath the anger was something older, quieter, and far more dangerous. Resolve. At 2 a.m., I opened my laptop and pulled up every account tied to my family utilities, tuition, healthcare, auto payments, even the credit card I'd given my parents for emergencies that had slowly morphed into their everyday convenience. I haven't touched anything yet. I just looked, and I saw it all. The pattern, the imbalance, the fact that I was still paying the mortgage on a house where I had just been publicly robbed, not of assets but of identity. That I was covering private school for children whose parents had never once asked how I was sleeping or eating or surviving. That the company I had built, Blue Nova, was still being treated as a family ATM. A resource, not a triumph. I stared at the screen until dawn broke behind the blinds, the city stretching its fingers across the skyline. Then I made a decision. Not a reaction. A strategy. I started with the accounts. I didn't cancel them all at once, too easy to be accused of spite. But I began the process of disentangling, slowly, deliberately. The mortgage. Still covered this month, but I set the next payment to bounce back to their responsibility. I flagged it in the system with a note, final external contribution. Samantha's kids' tuition. I called the school directly, explained that I would not be renewing the automatic payments. I asked them to notify Samantha with the next invoice, politely, professionally. The health insurance I'd extended under our company plan, I initiated removal of my parents and Samantha as dependents, citing a structural policy change. It wasn't about punishment, it was about freedom. That afternoon I called Rachel Adams, our company attorney. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp with concern the moment she heard mine. "We need to meet," I said, "today." By 4 p.m., I was in her office, documents spread across the conference table like the remnants of a broken trust. They tried to claim my shares, I told her. Said they'd spoken to a lawyer, threatened to transfer what they didn't own. Rachel narrowed her eyes. "That's not how shareholder transfers work. And you haven't signed anything." "I know," I said, "but intent matters, and they've made theirs clear." We spent the next 3 hours combing through every clause in the original agreement. The 15% stake my parents held still legally, theirs could be transferred, yes, but only with proper documentation and in accordance with shareholder protocols. But that wasn't what had shaken me. It was their assumption that they could take what was never theirs to begin with, that I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't stop them. "I want to restructure," I told Rachel. "Create a holding company, move the core assets, build a wall around what matters." She nodded. "We can do that, but we'll need to move fast." "I'm ready." I meant it, because the decision had already been made, not in Rachel's office, but in that moment at the dinner table when my father waved his hand and said, "You can always make more money, Natalie. That's what you're good at." That sentence had followed me home like a shadow. It wasn't just dismissive, it was a summary of my role in their story. Not daughter, not builder, not leader, just producer. And that night, for the first time in 34 years, I stopped playing the part. I silenced my phone, ignored the texts from Samantha asking about why the tuition email mentioned a billing change. I let my father's missed calls accumulate. The next morning, I got a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was shaking with a rehearsed kind of sadness. Natalie, how could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you. Please, call us. Your father's heart is breaking. I didn't respond. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting out of guilt. I was acting out of truth. Not to hurt them, but to finally protect myself. And maybe, just maybe, to begin building something even harder than a Company A life with boundaries. The receptionist's voice was tight, almost apologetic. Your parents and sister are here, Ms. Brooks. They didn't make an appointment. Of course they didn't. I looked at the time. 9:42 a.m., Wednesday. We had 3 client calls lined up, a design review scheduled for noon, and our expansion team waiting on my approval for 2 hiring decisions. I was in CEO mode, sleeves rolled, priorities stacked like dominoes. And now this. Put them in Conference B, I said evenly. And let Rachel know I'll need her. 5 minutes later, I walked into the room with our company attorney Rachel Adams at my side. She carried a slim notepad and an expression like a scalpel, precise and motionless, prepared to cut to the bone. My parents were seated side by side, visibly uncomfortable in the sleek glass room. My mother clutched her purse like it contained something sacred. My father's arms were folded, jaw tight. Samantha stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes flicking between Rachel and me like she couldn't decide who she resented more. "What's going on, Natalie?" my father said before I'd even taken a seat. "Charlotte says the mortgage didn't clear. The school said there's a change in billing. This is serious." Charlotte. He couldn't even keep our names straight when demanding answers. I sat down. Calm. Unrushed. Rachel did the same. "That's exactly why we're here," I said. "To clarify some boundaries." My mother leaned forward, her voice already trembling. "We didn't mean to upset you, honey. You just left dinner so suddenly. We thought we should come and clear the air." "You didn't upset me," I replied softly. "You clarified everything." Rachel opened her notepad. Samantha broke first. She stepped forward like she was still in control. "Just say it, Natalie. You're punishing us because Mom and Dad gave me the shares." I met her gaze. "No," I said. "I'm drawing a line. Because for too long this has been one way. I give, you take. No questions, no limits. That ends now." My father's voice sharpened. "We invested in you when no one else did. That 15%, it's ours. We can give it to who we want." "Yes," I nodded. "You can. And if you want to legally transfer your stake to Samantha, you'll need to go through proper procedures. Rachel can walk you through the tax implications and filing requirements." He blinked. This wasn't the reaction he expected. "But that's not what you said at dinner." I continued, my voice even. "You didn't say your shares. You said my shares. You tried to reassign ownership of something you never held." I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on the table. "Here is a record of every financial contribution I've made to this family in the last 5 years," I said. "Mortgage payments, car expenses, tuition for your grandchildren, Peter's failed studio, over $700,000. I let the numbers sit in the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. Rachel added, "None of these were legal obligations. All of them were voluntary, generous even." My mother's eyes welled with tears. "We didn't ask for all of that, Natalie. You offered. You said you wanted to help." "Yes," I said. "I did. And I don't regret the giving. I regret that the moment I tried to define limits, you framed me as selfish." Samantha scoffed. "This is about money to you, proving your worth, making us feel small." I shook my head. "No, this is about truth. Our relationship isn't mutual, it's transactional, but only in one direction, and I can't sustain that anymore." My father stood abruptly. "We won't be lectured by our daughter. If this is how you treat your family—" Rachel cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Brooks, Please understand your presence here today is not about family. It's about boundaries between personal obligation and business entanglement. Natalie has every right to restructure her finances and the company to ensure its long-term integrity. He sat down again wordless. For the first time, he looked smaller than I remembered. I'm not shutting the door, I said, standing slowly. But going forward, this relationship must change. I'm no longer your safety net. I'm not your investor or your emergency fund. I'm your daughter. And if you want that relationship, it starts with respect. They didn't answer. They left without another word. Rachel looked over at me once the door closed behind them. That couldn't have been easy. No, I whispered. But it was necessary. And sometimes necessary is enough. The door closed behind them with a soft, final click. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even exhale. I sat in that glass-walled conference room, watching their absence like it was a kind of proof that for all the years I had shown up, paid up, held it together, they had left the moment I said no. Rachel quietly packed her notes. We'll move forward on the restructuring, she said gently. I'll loop in the holding company specialists. And Natalie, good job today. It wasn't a compliment. It was a form of recognition. For clarity, for standing up, for drawing blood without raising my voice. Because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a door that closes and stays closed. That night I didn't go home. I stayed at the office. My team had gone for the day, the space humming only with machines and quiet light. I sat at my desk and opened the proposal Rachel and I had been building for weeks, but hadn't yet finalized the formation of a new holding company, Lumina Tech Collective, a name that meant light focus renewal. We'd been planning to roll it out in the new year, but after what happened, I knew we couldn't wait. Blue Nova was vulnerable, not because the company wasn't stable, but because I had made it emotionally porous. Family had slipped through cracks I hadn't even known I'd left open. By the end of that week, Ethan and I finalized the transfer of all intellectual property client contracts and core assets to Lumina Tech. The original Blue Nova entity still existed, but legally its influence was diluted. My parents' 15% remained intact, but isolated, weakened, and without operational power. We informed our core clients of the new structure in a carefully worded transition letter. The response, unanimous support. Timothy Westfield, our earliest client and now a mentor, called me personally. Whatever structure you need, Natalie, we're behind you. We're here because of your leadership. That hasn't changed. That call meant more than he could have known. Because while my family had responded to my success with assumption entitlement and eventual betrayal, my clients had responded with trust. And trust, I was learning, was the true currency of any empire. But the fallout was far from over. Within a week, the texts began. From my mother. We're not angry, just confused. What changed? From Samantha. The kids need their school payments reinstated. Don't do this to them. From my father. We made a mistake, but you're acting like a stranger. What happened to our daughter? And then came Peter. He showed up at the front desk one afternoon, uninvited, loud, and visibly angry. The receptionist called security before I even had to speak. You can't hide behind your lawyers, he shouted as they escorted him out. We know what you're doing. You don't get to cut family out and just walk away. The thing is, I wasn't walking away. I was finally standing still, rooted in something other than obligation. Rachel and I documented everything. The visits, the threats, the emails. We're not preparing for war, she said calmly. We're just refusing to be unarmed again. And so I armed myself. Not with revenge, not with retaliation, with structure, with protection, with clarity. And as the chaos around me swelled, my mother's voicemails turning from sorrowful to spiteful. Samantha, sending photos of her children captioned, still waiting for their aunt to love them. I stopped engaging. Because love isn't silence in the face of manipulation. Love is knowing when to walk away, so the cycle stops with you. Blue Nova continued to operate, but the heart of our company had already shifted. More and more clients and employees were aligning themselves with Lumina. The new entity gave us room to grow without legacy burdens, without blurred lines, without confusion about where family ended and the business began. And one morning, as I walked through the Lumina office, now buzzing with the energy of 20 employees and 3 new interns, I realized something. This wasn't survival anymore. It was healing, not the soft, romantic kind, but the slow, quiet kind you feel in your bones when you finally stop bleeding just to keep other people whole. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the sound of your phone not ringing, a chair that stays empty, a holiday that passes with silence. And for a while, that silence terrified me. After years of being entangled in constant demands, endless texts, and last-minute emergencies, the absence of noise felt foreign. Like standing in the eye of a storm and waiting for the sky to crack open again. But it didn't. And slowly the stillness became something else. Peace. It was during that quiet stretch after we finalized Lumina's new structure after the last threatening text from Peter was filtered into legal archives that I began to focus on something I had been avoiding for years myself. I started therapy. It wasn't dramatic, no big breakdown. Just a Thursday morning appointment with a soft-voiced woman named Elaine, who didn't flinch when I said I don't think I know who I am outside of being useful. She smiled gently. Then that's exactly where we'll begin. We talked about parentification, about what happens when a child is made to feel like their value is in how much they can carry, how love becomes transactional, how guilt gets coded into responsibility so tightly that you start confusing self-sacrifice with virtue. For the first time in my life, someone looked at my exhaustion and didn't praise it. They named it, and I finally let myself feel it. Meanwhile, Daniel, the man who had entered my life, quietly stayed. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer grand gestures or lectures about toxic family patterns. He simply made space, held it, protected it. When I canceled dinner plans to sit alone on the balcony with a journal and tears, I hadn't expected he brought me tea, kissed the top of my head and left the door cracked. When I told him I need time before I talk to them again, he didn't push. He nodded. You're allowed to need space, Natalie. And you don't owe anyone your exhaustion to prove your loyalty. It wasn't romantic. It was real. Respect wrapped in kindness. 6 months after restructuring Lumina, we hit a $12 million valuation. Not with viral headlines or investor buzz, but with consistent, sustainable growth. Clients trusted us. Employees thrived. The culture we built was collaborative, respectful, sane. And Blue Nova. Without me, it crumbled. My parents, now clinging to their 15% stake, had attempted to assert control, calling vendors, trying to override decisions, showing up at the original office unannounced. Employees left. Clients withdrew. Contracts lapsed. Eventually, the company was put up for sale. Rachel handled the legal side. I stayed out of it emotionally. But one afternoon, she sent me a quiet message. The sale is final. Your family received a modest payout, nowhere near what they once could have had. I didn't celebrate. There was no satisfaction in watching something I'd built be hollowed out by entitlement. The only thing I felt was a quiet ache for the version of family I used to hope was real. In the end, we helped transition the remaining employees to new roles at Lumina, ensuring no one else had to pay for what my family had done. As for me, I kept healing. Not perfectly, but intentionally. Yoga, boundaries, saying no without apology, saying yes only when I meant it. And love, real love. Daniel proposed on a rainy Sunday morning over blueberry pancakes. No ring, just a small linen notebook titled Our Next Chapter, filled with little notes and sketches of the life we'd talked about. I said yes without hesitation, because for the first time, I wasn't choosing out of fear, or obligation, or scarcity. I was choosing from wholeness. At the wedding, there were no speeches about overcoming odds or proving anyone wrong. Just people who had walked with me in the truth of who I was becoming. My family was invited. Most declined. Samantha sent a short message. Nothing to say until you remember what family means. But my father came. Quiet, alone. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't make excuses. He simply took a seat in the back row and watched his daughter walk forward into a life she had built not through inheritance or favoritism or blind obligation, but through boundaries, and a fierce kind of love that finally included herself. 1 year after that dinner, the one where my family tried to reassign my worth with a sentence and a signature, Lumina Tech Collective reached a valuation 50% higher than Blue Nova's peak. We had grown to 40 employees. We opened a second office in Seattle. We built mentorship programs for young women in tech and launched a platform update that would take us global. But numbers weren't what marked that anniversary. It was something quieter, more intimate. I woke that morning and didn't check my email first. I didn't brace for another emotional ambush disguised as a voicemail. I didn't calculate how much I had left to give. Instead, I made breakfast with Daniel Egg's toast, no phone nearby. He kissed my forehead and said, "You don't owe today to anyone." And I believed him, because I had finally learned success isn't just what you build, it's what you protect. Your peace, your time, your truth. Later that month, I invited my family to dinner not to return to what we were, but to test what we might become. A table, a meal, a boundary. Samantha declined. My mother sent regrets through a cousin, but my father came, alone again. He didn't ask about money. He didn't mention shares or who deserved what. Instead, over coffee, he said, "You built something real." And for once, I didn't hear a hidden ask beneath the words. It wasn't healing in the way I once imagined, no grand apologies, no tearful reunions. But it was quieter, cleaner, an acknowledgement. And sometimes that's enough to close a chapter. These days, I spend more time speaking to founders not about pitch decks or exit strategies, but about something even more important, emotional equity. Because it's easy to talk about profit and growth and disruption. Harder to talk about guilt, obligation, and the way our families sometimes hand us their fears disguised as loyalty. I tell them this. You are not selfish for having boundaries. You are not ungrateful for needing space. You are not unloving for choosing your well-being. True love does not require you to disappear inside someone else's comfort zone. Today, I lead a company. I lead a life. And for the first time, both are built around values I chose, not roles I inherited. If my story has found you at a crossroads between what you were told to be and what you know you are, then I hope you'll remember this. You do not have to earn your right to peace. You were born worthy of it. Thank you for listening to my journey. Now tell me, what part of your story are you ready to reclaim? That was my story, not just about building a company, but about rebuilding myself after realizing love without boundaries isn't love, it's debt. I don't know where you are on your journey. Maybe you're still the one giving, still afraid to say no. Maybe you're already walking away from what once defined you. Wherever you are, I hope you remember this. You don't have to earn your right to rest. You don't have to keep proving your worth just to be treated with basic respect. You are allowed to draw the line. And when you do, when you finally say enough, that's not the end of love. That's the beginning of truth. If this story spoke to something inside you, let me know in the comments. What part of your story Are you ready to reclaim? And if you believe boundaries are not betrayal, but healing, subscribe. You're not alone anymore.